Exactly, yeah.
But you won big as well, haven't you?
I have won big, yeah. I got up to £127,000 online in one weekend and then lost that all within about 26 minutes playing roulette. Yeah.
£127,000 tax-free cash.
Probably about 10 or 11 spins.
We call it impulsive when it fails, and we call it inspired when it works. The thing about the moment changes, the decision is the same shape either way. Fast, unplanned, no committee meeting in your school before you act, only the outcome changes, and somehow we've let the outcome decide what we're allowed to call the moment. That should bother you more than it does. Because if that's true, then there's no such thing as a good decision or a bad one at the moment you make it. There's only a decision. The label gets applied later by people who weren't in the room based on evidence that didn't exist when you moved. So what actually separates the artist from the addict? The genius from the reckless idiot? What separates Van Gogh's night sky from a car crash? I used to think the answer was talent. It's not. The answer is a lot less flattering than that, and a lot more useful. Start with the machine itself, because the machine doesn't lie to you the way your self-image does. Every impulsive act you've ever had, the good ones and the ones you still cringe about at 2 AM, comes from the same tug-of-war in your skull. On one side, your prefrontal cortex, the part of you that plans, that weighs consequences, that says wait. On the other side, your striatum, the part of you that wants right now with no interest in tomorrow. Here's the part that should unsettle you. Scientists used to think that impulsive people just had too much dopamine, too much wanting. When researchers actually raised dopamine in the frontal cortex, the planning part, impulsivity went down, not up. It's not that impulsive people want too much, it's the part of them built to negotiate with the wanting is outgunned. Which means impulsivity was never about how strongly you feel something, it's about which system wins when two systems disagree. You don't have impulses, you host a negotiation, and most of us have never once asked which side is winning by default. Here's where it gets a bit uncomfortable, because I know what you're doing right now. You're picturing the artists, the one who threw the plan away and made something that outlived them. You're building the case that maybe losing the negotiation is exactly what art requires. You're wrong, but you're wrong in an interesting way. Psychologists who study this draw a line that most people would never draw. Spontaneity and impulsivity are not the same thing, and they don't even move in the same direction. The research is almost eerie about this. Spontaneity correlates positively with creativity. Impulsivity correlates negatively with it. Say that back to yourself. The thing that looks like impulsiveness from the outside, fast, unplanned, alive, is only creative when it isn't impulsive, when there's no war going on underneath it. Because impulsivity is what happens when the one overrides the self entirely. No negotiation, no witness, just the one driving the body. Spontaneity is something else. Spontaneity is what happens when there's nothing left to override, because the self and the want stop being enemies. One researcher put it almost exactly like this. Impulsivity happens without the ego's consent. Spontaneity happens because the ego stopped needing to give consent in the first place. That's not the same skill pointing in two directions. That's two different relationships with your own mind. Nietzsche split art itself down the same line, 2,000 years before a lab could measure dopamine. He called one half Apollonian, order, form, the god of clean lines and clear thought. He called the other half Dionysian, chaos, ecstasy, the god of wine and dissolved boundaries, the part of you that stops being able to tell where you end up and the world begins. Here's what people get wrong about Nietzsche. They think he was picking a side, team chaos down with order. He wasn't. He said that art dies without both. Form without rapture is a corpse. Rapture without form is noise. The tension between them, not the victory of either one, is where the actual work gets made. Sculpture is almost pure Apollonian. Music at its wildest is almost pure Dionysian. But a painting that survives 500 years is neither one. It's a structure built specifically to hold something that wanted to escape that structure entirely, which means the artists you admire for their impulsiveness were never actually impulsive. They built a container strong enough to survive their own chaos, and then they let the chaos in on purpose. I need to break the spell for a second, because I think you already sense a book coming in, and you're right. The surrealists are the closest thing history has to prove pure creative impulse. Automatic drawing, automatic writing, the entire premises was turn off the conscious mind, let the hand move on its own, and whatever comes out is the unfiltered self, finally honest. Even the artist who invented the technique admitted it wasn't automatic. He said on the record that what looked like pure unconscious output was actually a twofold process, unconscious and conscious, working together the whole time. The most famous impulsive art movement in history was quietly editing itself the entire time it claimed not to be. So if even the people who built a religion around impulse couldn't actually do it purely, what does this tell you about the rest of us romanticising our worst 1 a.m. decisions as some kind of creative fire? It tells us that the fire was never the whole story. It was never even the interesting part of the story. The interesting part is what was holding the fire so it didn't just burn the house down. I'm not going to pretend like this cuts only one way, because that would be a lie by omission. There's a strand of research that looks at people whose emotional lives run permanently hot. The kind of intensity that shows up in some personality disorders, and found exactly what you'd expect if impulsivity really is chaos without a container. Yes, that intensity sometimes produced original, spontaneous ideas that nobody else would have reached for, but it also just as often made it still impossible to finish everything. The same wave that generated the idea couldn't be trusted to sit still long enough to shape it. That's the whole argument in one sentence. Impulse gives you raw material. It has never, not once, given anyone a finished piece of work. The people we call impulsive geniuses are the ones who survived long enough and stayed structured enough to turn the wave into something that could outlast the moment it arrived in. The ones who didn't survive that, we don't call them artists, we call them warnings. I have to be honest about where I actually am in this, because it would be dishonest to hand you a theory and pretend I discovered it from a safe distance. I left a certain path with strong grades behind me on a decision from the outside that looked instant. It wasn't instant. It felt instant because the moment I said out loud was fast, but underneath that moment was a year of quiet structural disagreement between what I was doing and what I actually wanted. A negotiation that I'd been running the whole time, mostly without me noticing it was a negotiation at all. What looked like an impulsivity leap was actually the exact thing I've been describing to you from the last 10 minutes. Spontaneity, not impulsivity. A decision that felt sudden because the deliberation happened somewhere I wasn't watching, not because there was no deliberation at all. I could have called that risk-taking. I could have called it following my gut. Both of those phrases let me skip the part where I built, slowly and mostly invisibly, a version of myself that could survive making that call. That's the part that nobody puts in the caption. So if you're watching this and hoping I'm about to tell you to trust your gut more, to be more impulsive, and stop overthinking and just leap, I'm not going to do that, because it isn't true. And I said at the start of this channel, I wasn't going to hand you things that feel good instead of things that are honest. What I'm telling you is harder than that. If you want the kind of life that looks impulsive from the outside, spontaneous, alive, unafraid, the actual work is not loosening your grip. It's building a self strong enough that loosening that grip doesn't destroy anything. Hollow before Dionysus, structure before chaos, the container before the fire, not instead of it. Anyone can act without thinking. That's not rare and it's not brave. What's rare is building a mind stable enough that when you finally act without thinking, what comes out is a leap and not just a fall. We call it impulsive when it fails, we call it inspired when it works. But now you know that the truth sitting beneath both of those worlds. It was never about the moment, it was about everything you built, quietly, long before the moment ever arrived.